You got to look at yourself first, see where you're at with the environment you're in, understand how you feel about it, and be clear about that with yourself.
We started the episode, so just a quick recap. We had a little technical difficulty as we were starting out, but we persevered. We made it through.
Yep, we absolutely did. And isn't that an example of what needs to happen in most cases where people, it's like, we're so close, and then they're like, oh, it's too much. I can't go any further. And it's right around, success is right around the corner.
Yeah. Or I think there's also another desire to shift blame. Right, to say, hey, it's so-and-so's fault or this other stupid thing, or to get really frustrated with whatever's going on and put the fault or the blame on a thing or a person rather than just say, hey, it is what it is. Let's just fix it and move
That's
forward.
I think the tendency of many to do that. What it's funny. I was orphaned and adopted, but I had this wonderful family that I grew up with. My father was a 32nd degree Mason. And as a teen, we were talking about things, and I obviously was being a teenager, right? And he said, when you point your finger, don't forget you got three of them coming right back at you.
Yeah.
So if you're looking at a problem, you're pointing at it, you better have three solutions or keep your mouth shut.
Hmm. It's good. I definitely don't think most people consider that at all, especially in today's age. I was literally just having a conversation with my wife about just all the goings on in the world currently. And there's a lot of stuff going on.
A lot of distractions, right?
Yeah. And it feels very easy to slip into, hey, it's this person's fault. It's this person's fault. That person's the worst. This person's the worst. And you could devolve into this back and forth argument pretty quickly. But it doesn't get us anywhere. It doesn't get us any closer to a solution. It just is a conversation of like, who's the bad guy, rather than, hey, how do we move forward?
Right.
I think it's a really interesting spot that we're in right now, where there's so much distraction from actual progress, because it's just almost more fun to blame somebody else.
And that's the program pattern response, right? That's the group think. And
Right.
an individual would look at that, and I agree. I've had conversations with my wife too, Jim, and it's one most recent yesterday evening. She's a piano pedagogue, was trained in Mussorgsky College in Leningrad, Russia,
Wow.
or USSR at that time. So she's got a skill set for teaching and an understanding of piano beyond your imagination. For those that don't know about Mussorgsky College, it's equal to, if not greater than, Juilliard or Banff or those types
Wow.
of schools in the West. With her students, though, she is so fastidious in finding that place to inspire them, right? Because if a child's not inspired to do something, they won't. And you invite adults too, right? We can put that. So in that, the objective is to get over the frustration and look at the options and opportunities that one has to stretch themselves to really dig into what they know and understand, especially in child development and pedagogy, and pull out those skills that are there, develop them further. And as we were talking about it, so your attitude shifting from kind of angry and depressed to like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. I can see how that might work, because
Right.
we went from what is, right? Didn't deny the frustration, the anger, and all of that. You have to embrace it, right? And then shift that to, okay, what else is possible that would make me feel better instead of this, um, disgruntled feeling, right? And we all
Right.
have that capacity to make a choice to do so, and to Not necessarily ignore the distractions or what's going on in the world, because it's important to know that. However, in your own sphere of influence, what can you do? The only
Mm,
thing you can do is manage your own choices and what's right in front of you to do. The rest of it is just an opportunity to distract yourself.
yeah. So I'm sort of hearing you say there, it's almost like this, okay, so now what mentality where it's like, all right, it is what it is. Like,
Yeah.
what can I do? What choice can I make to really shape the reality of it?
I
And I
find a
think
good
that's an
question is how
interesting,
can I serve better? Right? Because that's demanding of yourself. Put yourself on notice. You hit the pause button,
right?
right? Reflect, self examine, and then look for what opportunities are present, not for yourself or your own self aggrandizement or something like that. It's more of the what can I do to serve this moment to a greater capacity that will move it into, for lack of a better, a higher state of coherence.
Are you serving it for the people around you, or are you serving it for yourself?
Both. The interesting thing there's some esoteric material called the Law of One, and it basically states that there's two motivations that manage us: fear and love, service to self, service to others. What we find, or what I've found, and others like me, is that the ultimate service to self is service to others. Because everybody wins. Dale Carnegie, Zig Ziglar, these are guys that brought it out a long
Right.
time ago that we still don't pay attention to.
Yeah. I almost think that there are people who think because it's not this super polished, trendy, 1 minute long Instagram or TikTok reel that is flashy, the advice isn't as sound. And I find it to be the contrary. Like, this has been long-standing advice for a reason, because it is solid and it works.
Right. There's simple, succinct statements or affirmations, if you will, depending on your experience, right? Because
Right.
unless you've experienced it, you really don't understand why that was said. And the direct experience we lack is because of our own choices not to engage.
So let's go on that for a second, because engaging can be scary, right? So
Oh,
that there are
often
people
is.
who are going to be in a situation where it's like, hey, in order for me to move forward, I'm going to have to face a fear or accept something that I've been running from for a long time, right? So how does someone lean into that,
Well,
the
there's an
fear
old
of
adage about
going forward?
fear. And I was first presented it back in, oh gosh, 1990 when I was doing a public access TV show. One of my guests was a Native American mixed blood Cherokee storyteller. And he says, fear is really false evidence appearing real. And what we seek to do is free every anxious reaction. So just think about those implications for a moment. Fear is more of a door than a hindrance. And you step through it, you realize that, oh, all of my imaginings just weren't true. Because 99% of our fears, as we confront them, we find out they're false evidence appearing real.
Mm.
And it was just our lack, our fear, our resistance to stepping through that door of the unknown and understanding that the challenge to change, it's only three letters difference in those two words. The LLE in challenge turns into liabilities, limitations, and excuses that we offer for not changing and adapting.
It's a good one. And for most people, those are self-inflicted, you'd say, right? Those limitations that
Oh, it's all
either it's
self-inflicted. We have the choice. There's nobody else that controls us. We give our power away or we choose to hold on to it.
right. But how do you make that shift? I agree with you. How do you make that shift for someone who's listening right now to take the power back?
Look at where you're people pleasing, first of all. How you are extending yourself for others that depletes you instead of empowers you. That's a good reference. You can examine your life, see what you're doing, see how you're not being authentic with others. Authentic doesn't mean being, a rageaholic and when you get triggered, just the opposite. It means being more self-determined, mindful of what's happening around you, engaging with curiosity rather than projection, which means asking questions.
Mhm.
Hey, help me understand this more. I know you've got a strong point you want to make. I'm not quite getting it. Could you explain more so that I understand you? Uh, I have a wonderful mentor. Um, he's 20 years my senior, was once president of the American Alternate Dispute Resolution Society or Association, I'm sorry. And he's under the belief that there's no conflict. There's simply miscommunication. We arrive at the table with an agenda. We speak and listen from our own dictionary. We do not understand the other's dictionary so that there's constant, you know, miscues and
Right.
misinformation and because of our own lack of understanding. So fits into Covey's fifth habit, right? Seek first to understand before being understood. So when you make those efforts, it shows your appreciation for others, your acknowledgement, your validation of them. What more can a person want than to be seen and heard?
Hmm. Yeah, it's one of my favorite expressions I say is that everyone's got four basic needs to feel seen, heard, loved, and appreciated. And I feel
Absolutely.
like for people that have those four things checked off, so to speak, they're able to show up in the world so much easier because they're not seeking that from other people in every interaction. Right? You're able to approach an interaction very neutral because you're not seeking to get the appreciation of this other person. You're willing to just see them for who they are
Mm-hmm.
because you're not needing them to fill that void in you.
No, and energetically, right? Let's look at, if we can, dive off into quantum physics for a moment and
Sure.
the law of attraction, right? The quantum physics is proving the precepts of the law of attraction. The non-movement of pushing and pulling energy to be still with your intent, your attention, and your interaction toward whatever your goal is with singular focus. And so by doing that, I mean, when you begin to look into all these kinds of things, you create uh, it's been said anyway, that you create a momentum tunnel that the more you focus and move forward based on that sense, you can't think your way through a system built on vibration. You got to sense your way through it. You just acknowledge that. So in
Right.
doing so, there's no push or pull there. We seek flow. And with the application of the understanding of quantum physics and how our feelings and thoughts will either retract or repel, or attract or repel, it just makes sense. And yes, when you're first learning this, it can be pretty spooky cool, actually, because you don't understand what's going on yet. You've just applied this principle, you've seen the results, there's awe in your being because it worked, and then it's just a rinse and repeat from there,
Right.
building upon that.
But I think most people don't get the well, I shouldn't say they don't get the opportunity. They don't take the opportunity to really build that momentum because they shift way too frequently on what they focus on.
Mm-hmm.
Or they move to the next fear or the next thing, and all of a sudden they forgot to stick with the first one,
Now,
which
it
really
doesn't
makes
mean
me
there's not
think.
going to be the tangents, right?
Yeah,
Because those things are, when you embrace reality, you acknowledge what is, you're still going to have those things. They're going to come up for review, and you're going to go, oh, I want to play with this for a little bit, or nah, not now, or
Right.
I don't need you anymore, right? Those kinds of things. And it's
Yeah.
amazing for me to have a direct experience of it and then be able to share that 50-year journey that I've had with my clients or cohorts or whatever organization. I'm operations director for a global peace movement called Live and Let Live, to be able to apply all of these things toward building an organization and acknowledging and loving the people there. This is one thing we miss. In my opinion, our design almost requires us to love and be loved. And when we miss that, that's the core of our being, right? This is what we're told from every angle in religion of all kinds,
Right.
right? That basis of loving and being loved. This is what Creator has for us. Well, how do we give that back? Right? No judgment, no criticism, no condemnation. Because we can't walk in other people's shoes. All we can do is try to understand them so we can work with them more effectively.
Right. 'Cause I feel like, you're called to love your neighbor as you love yourself. But how can you love your neighbor if you don't love yourself first? I think, when I'm
Perfect.
hearing you say that, there's a lot of that has to do to me with the authenticity part for people, right? And really
Yeah, and
truly
self-love
embracing who
sounds
they
so
are.
nihilistic, right?
Yeah.
And it's not. It doesn't mean, bathing yourself in all the stuff, the
Right. You're
acquisition.
not glorifying yourself. You're loving
No,
yourself for who you are.
it's just the opposite. It's quite humbling to be in that place. A couple of my books, or a few of them recently, Navigating Holistic Growth, The Servant Leader's Guide, Beyond Service, The Unconventional Conventionalist, are all about serving in that way. It's about being a servant leader today. And I think this is what Schwab meant when he asked the question, are businesses agile enough to survive after COVID? And it just makes sense that we've got to be flexible, not just as a business, but as people,
Right.
because businesses are nothing without the people in them.
Yeah. I often find businesses are really just a reflection of the problems that people have.
Yeah. Well, it's the old, right, problem solution.
Right.
That's how business is built. We find a problem, we create a solution, and we market the heck out of it.
Yeah. Well, I even mean more so the health of the business is going to be a reflection of the health of the person leading the business.
Absolutely.
So if
The
the
culture.
leader is not in a good spot where they are authentically operating from a spot of love and service, the business is not going to be able to properly serve the customers if the leader is not able to serve the business.
Absolutely. It's a difference between the command and control structure and a kind of chaotic organization like DHOC had when he first started Visa, where it was horizontal instead of vertical. There were tasks, skill sets, aptitudes, attitudes, and details that needed to be done, and they were distributed across the people that can handle it.
Right.
It's an
Yeah.
interesting configuration. And the more horizontal we get, the more authentic the relationships become, and the more people are happy. And happy people get more done with less supervision and will exceed expectations every time.
Right. Well, that's a scary thought for some people because they feel like they have to release control. Right. There's a lot of leaders or quote unquote leaders who want to control every action their team member takes because they feel like they know better than their team member will, and it leaves people feeling not seen, not heard, not appreciated because they need to be micromanaged. Right.
Right.
So you would say that for those people, for the leaders to be able to trust their people and to allow them to go out and be their best self, there
Now, it
needs to
doesn't
be
eliminate. Yeah, absolutely, Jim. That be your best self. That's
right.
it. Right. That's the second principle for our global peace movement, Live and Let Live. We have two principles, a legal and a moral. The legal is don't aggress, and we work to calibrate the law to remove aggression. The moral side of it is be an excellent human, be your best self.
Yeah.
Only you know what that is. and the rest of us are there to support that process.
Mm. It reminds me very much of the expression, which I've expanded a little bit, but in our family, one of the core values we have is leave every person, place, and thing better than you found it. Right. So,
That's an
right,
old
every
camper
person,
tale, right?
yeah, yeah, it's a simple concept, but far too often we seek to just consume rather than, hey, every interaction, can I leave you with a little bit of something? Can I pick up a piece of garbage when I walk? Can I compliment you on your shirt? Like, there are little things that you can do, but it raises the tide for every interaction. And hey, how much better would you feel if you got that little nudge, right? And if all of us operated in that way, we would slowly start to see these aggressions fall off because we would feel appreciated, we'd feel seen, we'd feel heard.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, again, such a simple thing, but if we can shift that change in culture to showing
Absolutely.
up for each other and appreciating, right, the world as a whole would start to heal.
Absolutely. And the initial part of that is going to feel uncomfortable, maybe
Yeah.
even inauthentic because you haven't done it before. I will
Mm.
guarantee you, anyone who shifts to looking for things to complement others and life about will notice a drastic shift in their overall experience of life. It may take a little time for that to happen. I've witnessed it, my own direct experience, my clients, others that I've worked with, organizations that I've been in, teams that I've led. It's just amazing how that little shift of focus can make the most amazing difference.
Yeah. Do you find it to be something that is beneficial to journal, like to have maybe a little gratitude journal? Like, how do you
Absolutely.
start
Yeah.
doing that?
Little thoughts here and there. I kept journals for years. Lately, I haven't been keeping journals because I've been writing. Um,
Right.
However, having those notes and every once in a while just going back and looking at your own progression, looking for the consistent notes in your journals about your aspirations and your dreams, what you might want to achieve, and then look at the progress that you've made toward it.
Yeah. I actually heard a really good idea the other day was, hey, once a month, just go back and scroll through your photo album in your phone and just find something to be grateful for. Like, no matter what, chances are pretty strong that sometime in the past 30 days, something happened that you can be grateful for. And like, it's such a simple concept, but even if you're not someone who's used to, journaling or writing in a book, to spend some intentional time and look for things to be grateful for,
Mhm.
I think is so powerful, especially when you take the 30-day look back, because there's a lot of things that are happening in this current week that we might not be grateful for in the moment, but in 2-3 weeks from now, we might realize, hey, this thing which was really frustrating, right? So this morning when we started off this podcast episode and it didn't go according to plan, right? We could have chose to be frustrated, but hey, maybe that led us to start talking about this thing that now we're grateful for. Right? So when you start to look back and have that retrospective appreciation for all the things that happen in your life, you start to not get frustrated.
Oh, yeah.
And it's
Whether
such
it's
a
30
freeing
seconds,
feeling.
30 minutes, 30 days,
Yeah.
that attitude shift, it just brings so much richness
Yes.
with it.
It's really difficult in the moment to release sometimes, though, right? Because,
Well, you got to train
like,
yourself. Think about
right.
this. Speaking of thinking and not thinking our way through a system built on vibration, right? That's kind of an oxymoron or paradox, if you will, because we're going to think. We're going to think. 70,000 of them a day is what the neuroscientists say.
Yeah,
70,000 thoughts a day. How many of those are self-deprecating?
probably 3/4 or
Okay.
more.
So what do you got to do? Examine your thoughts.
Right.
Be aware of what, be aware of how and what you are thinking. When you begin to pay attention, and there's an observer self in each one of us, you know that to be true. And everybody
Yeah.
that's listening, I know they watch themselves. There's a constant vigilance over yourself. That's you wanting you to be your best you. So paying attention to that, acknowledging the thoughts that you have, and then redirecting them to something more positive, something to be grateful for. Gratitude's a great tool for transcendence and
Yeah.
transformation.
And so, is it a switch you flip, right? Can you just, for someone who's not intentionally grateful or who finds himself stuck in that thought, can you flip a switch, or is it a more gradual over time progression from not not allowing yourself to fall into the frustration to, hey, at a certain point after years of practice, you start to build up that mechanism in your head where the feedback loop is much shorter,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because I think that there's a lot of people, I know the answer obviously, but I think that there's a
Yeah,
lot of
we ask
people
questions
who
we know the answers to, right?
I think there's a lot of people who are listening who say maybe I just can't flip the switch, and they expect it to be this thing where they can just tomorrow all of a sudden be that version of themselves, and they put too much pressure on the process where they're
Again,
not
the
allowing themselves to
self-deprecation,
go through it.
right?
Right.
That's where the self-deprecation picks back up again. Embrace yourself, love who you are, all of it. Find something, I do a ritual every morning where I honor the four directions. I face them all and I gather the energy. I bring it to my heart. I give it to the cosmos with gratitude for everything, even the trauma that I may be, or trials and tribulations that I may be going for. Because if you can be grateful for those things, the rest is easy. Now, to be, and here's where the tenure of living comes in, right? Where you can look back in your life and see where you had some event that happened that was traumatic, let's say. And I'm sure everybody's had one. And then look at how that event and your changes in your attitude, your aptitude, your altitude affect your life moving forward and how you've grown from that place to where that's no longer a trauma. You've
Right.
recognized how to let it go, right? That letting go process. You spoke of, is it a switch in the moment or is it a long term? Yes. You've got to learn that both are true. You have to have that first switch flip, which often, from my experience, comes with conversations with others that you're willing to be vulnerable in and authentic. Because if nobody is reflecting back to you and all you're engaged in is your inner dialogue, it's not usually going to be pretty. And you're going to be fighting yourself to overcome things. Where if you're speaking with another, and there's ancient awareness, if you will, that we are each other. Because and now quantum physics, there's no physicality; it's all energy, so we're connected. So in that willingness to be authentic and vulnerable, and having another ask questions and point out what speech you're using that reflects that self-deprecation and or limitation or liability or excuse, then you have a chance to acknowledge that. And then when you're in a psychologically safe and intellectually humble environment to do so, which is what coaching is set up to do, and now many other servant leaders are expanding that into things like Theory U, Otto Scharmer and his work, and the group development of being able to be present and let go of the past, just be right there, acknowledge the skill sets, the intuitive notions of how to then move forward as a group, whether you're building a prototype, you're engaging a project, moving people, however that works, it works better when these processes are in place.
Right. Yeah, and that takes repetition, right? So it almost becomes this series of, like we
Habits.
talked about, hey, is it gradual or is it a switch? It's almost 10,000 switches flipped one at a time, very
Mhm.
slowly over time, right?
Absolutely.
Very
And each one
intentional
of
choices.
those, there's layers, right? We have these thoughts and they appear at one level, and then the same thought expressed differently, the same core energy of the thought, if you will,
Right.
happens on multiple levels. And those, hence the multiple switches, like you just mentioned. That's for
Yeah.
sure.
So let me ask you another question. In your view, is there one path to this enlightenment or this success, or is
Absolutely
it
not.
very individual?
Absolutely not one path, although there is one love. Okay. Individuals, uniqueness. Every person has their own path, and we can't tell them what it is. Person has to discover it. With my clients, I use the skill sets, aptitude, attitude, passion, purpose, all those kinds of things that we tap into in the conversations to unveil how their current skill set and one they're developing can serve their greater dream, vision, passion, purpose, in the moment and in the future. Because
Right.
there's always, when you're in one situation and it's uncomfortable and you want to change, there's an exit strategy that has to be developed. And that's not something to be taken lightly. Again, this gets back into the attention, intention, and interaction. One of the things that's been most prolific in its results, survey says, is intention. That's one thing you can hold constantly. And every time something happens, your intention is to be your best.
Yeah. It's a really beautiful thing. And I think for most people, in order to operate as your unique self and find your individual path, you need to know who you are. Because
Mhm.
there's a lot of people who are out there following the instruction manual for someone else's life and then getting frustrated when it doesn't work out. Right. I always think
That's so
about,
funny. It happens. I don't want. I'm not laughing at it. I'm laughing with it because we all fall
yeah,
into that at some point.
the analogy I would give is if you've got a friend who is an apple farmer and they grow the best apples ever, okay? And they
Mhm.
are an expert at growing apples. And you go to them and you ask them for advice on how to grow watermelons. Okay, if you follow the advice for how to grow apples and apply it to how to grow watermelons, you're probably not going to grow the best watermelons,
Mm-mm.
right? But we
Or
do
you're going to have a
this.
hybrid tree.
Yeah, either one. Maybe we'll invent apple melon. But my point there is there are so many people who take someone else's advice verbatim and then get frustrated when they don't get the same result
Yeah,
because they're missing the fact that they have to be aligned with their authentic self and do things that align with who they are. And I think for a lot of people, they struggle with even finding out who they are in the first place.
absolutely. And with all of the projections of others that will impact that development. Again, this falls, especially in America, we're very codependent. We want to be what everybody else thinks we ought to be, first, and instead of recognizing that we have an individuated consciousness that is capable of doing anything we choose. Now, there's some references for that we often gloss over, and I think are coming back a bit more because of quantum physics proving them. And that's the Vedas, which are an ancient set of poems that were written in Sanskrit. And basically, it kind of tells us who we are and what we're here, why we're here, and how we're here. The gist of it is that it says we're all divine threads incarnate, connected to source by whatever name you want to call it, and capable of God consciousness. What's that mean? We have an individual access point to infinite intelligence specific to us.
Hmm.
Right? It's not specific to anybody else because it can't be. We're the unique one that has access to the data pool, if you will, based on our queries. Asking better questions leads us into better answers, more possibility, and especially if we're asking of, okay, how do we integrate all this? Like, for instance, my work with planetary citizens, I took a model of the spiral dynamics co-creation wheel and exploded it into the possibilities on an individual, collective, and planetary possibilities of bringing that into a holistic system. There's 12 sectors. Each of those sectors have pioneers in them and the overall global village, if you will, that we're currently constructing. Some of it's okay, some of it's not so good. We have that capacity to learn how to work together better to do this because we are a global village now. We're one planet, we're one people. We got only a limited amount of resources. How do we use those? How do we become a type 1 civilization, which is what Kardashev was intimating in this ability of our civilization to use Kardashev scale briefly, a brief tangent. What that scale is the types of civilizations and their energy use. So type 1 is able to use all of their planetary energy and it produces energy, whether it's electromagnetic, wind, water, uh, those natural kinds of productions that we haven't learned how to tap into yet. A
Yeah.
type 2 uses a solar system to for their energy, and a type 3 uses the galaxy. So consciousness also evolves because we have to understand the natural laws involved in order to tap into these energy sources. And we're built to do so by our natural design. Everything's connected. We just haven't figured out just how yet.
Yeah.
And guys like
Well, I
you and
think,
I are like, we're exploring, okay, how's this all work? Right?
right.
What are the things that we've found that we can share that give others a step up for their own lives?
Yeah. I also think there's an inclination for people to ask better questions to Google than to go back and do some self reflection and prayer and ask the same questions. Right. So we've gotten to a point now where we're seeking information from the wrong source.
Well, I don't know. I don't know about that because AI's got a built-in emotional intelligence that I noticed from the get-go. I don't know if anybody else has. From my discussions with others, it does. You know, it was built by humans to serve humans for the best of humanity. This is
Right.
the intention most people have. Some don't. Most do. So, for instance, I built a chat GPT for planetary citizens, and I loaded it with the Vedas, the I Ching, or the Tao Te Ching, and the uh, Bhagavad Gita, Bible, Quran, all kinds of different ancient scriptures, and from which to query from with current day questions, right? Even without that, the inquiry, the self examination, if you're asking the questions of chat, it's going to give you options to look at. It may not be as profound or awe striking as a direct experience of that, let's call it spirit circuit communication, right? Which is vastly different, right? It's that direct experience in the moment where
Right.
serendipitous synchronicities just kind of fall into place and you go, wow, that was weird, right? However, with this other, it's a using chat or other features like that, the self-reflective qualities can be eschewed a little. However, with all the material, if you're, if you've got a large presence online or something like that, you can query it and just see how it sees you.
Yeah. So I think the clarification there would be it can give you some good information, it's still up to you to then interpret it right yourself.
Right.
I think you
Well, it's the
can't
gut.
necessarily.
It's the intuition. It's how
Right.
it's that resonance of truth, right? That we all have a sense of, even though we may not pay attention to it. We second
Right.
guess our gut most of the time. And there's another ancient system, if you will. The indigenous call it the three brain system, or at least that's what it's evolved to: the gut, the heart, and the head. The gut, your solar plexus, intuition, gut feeling, all of those kinds of things. Those things have been around forever. There's more neurosensors in the gut than there are in the brain. So then you take that energy where you're connected to everything, you sense it without reservation. That's the what is, right? Everything around you is telling you what it is. Then you bring that up and you distill that sensation in your heart. Is it desirable or is it undesirable, and to what degree? Then you take that information and feed it to the supercomputer on top of your shoulders for better choices.
Right. So let me ask you your opinion on this. Gut feelings. People who make decisions based on what their gut tells them, right? Because there's obviously some semantics in here, but
Yeah.
to me, the way that I believe this or perceive it is those are things that you know to be true. You cannot verbalize them in the way that you would if it was just a conscious thought, right? So the way that I see
Initially, absolutely, yeah.
gut feelings is stuff that you still know to be true. It's not just making a willy-nilly decision.
Yeah, and it's
There
not
is
a guess, it's a knowing. It's an
right,
undeniable knowing, and yet do we listen?
right. That's a big decision, right? And how do you build that trust in your gut?
Well, stop listening to others, first of all. Right? Not that others don't have great comments and helpful suggestions and you know constructive criticisms, right? However,
So
there,
it's taking back control, right?
yeah,
And taking control out of other people's hands and bringing it back to you to make those decisions and carry out your own reality.
yeah, there's an interesting paradox there, right? It doesn't matter what you think, feel, or believe, but how others perceive you. Conversely, it doesn't matter how others perceive you, but how you think, feel, and believe about yourself. So there's that delicate balance, and when you find that flow, those two worlds will begin to merge.
Yes. And how much easier does that feel to walk through life when you're operating in that flow state?
Mhm.
It's
You don't
almost
have
like
to
a
worry
cheat
about
code.
what you've said or what you've
Yeah.
done, right? Because you trust yourself, you trust what's been going on. If there are kerfuffles in the process, they're much easier to deal with because you're willing to. You're not
Right.
in denial.
Yeah. I would 100% endorse that. And it's sort of a uncomfortable process to start, I think, right? So for someone who is at square one on the journey, you can't look at getting to the end point yet because there's a lot of stuff you got to go through and grow through to get to that point. There's a lot of experiences, conversations, growth.
We got to learn to ask
Some
for
of it,
help.
yeah, I think some of it could be scary if you try and climb a mountain in one step. It's going to be a scary process to go through.
It is. But then when you
But
get to the top of the mountain, you got to realize doesn't matter, right? You're
yeah,
on the top of the mountain. You're by yourself. You're not affected for anybody else. You got to climb off the mountain, go back in, and mingle
yeah.
with the community in order to be effective in any way.
Mm. I actually, you know, I don't know if you meant to do this on purpose, but when you said you're by yourself there, the first thing that I thought of was you've stripped away other people's beliefs of you, and now you're by yourself. You're with yourself. And I think that's a really powerful place to be.
Absolutely. And I don't want to diminish that point. You've got to go. Everybody has to
Yeah.
find themselves the center of who you are. Different for everyone. Has to be. is we're all different people.
Right.
However, there is that core, again, back to the loving and being loved, and everything expands from there when you're able to allow yourself to be in that place. It's an acquiescence as opposed, or a submission. People don't like submission, right? A bad word, right? I don't want to submit to anything. So acquiesce.
Right. And I also don't want to gloss over your point there of being at the top of the mountain is not the end goal. The end goal is kind of who you become in the process to then go back down and bring more people back up.
Right. Every wave form that we become particle of, right, has a peak and a valley. You got to go up and get clear and come back down and spread the word.
Right.
You want to look at it like that.
Yeah. No, I do. And I think, there's tremendous value in that. And it's literally one of the reasons why you and I are here right now is to spread that word, right? To
Yeah,
share this for people who have not heard that yet, who are still on the climb up, whether it's 5 feet or 500 feet, right? They got a mountain to climb.
sure. And
And,
it's individual. We need
yeah.
to make this distinction. Nobody is going to come and save you
Mm,
except you.
right.
And this is even what Jesus taught, right? And we've got his message and understanding. It's been all, in my opinion, it's just been deflected. Whereas if we look at it, he gave all of those messages that, you have your own direct connect. Use it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a gift. And we look past it all the time because it requires a little bit more work than just, taking someone else's advice because then we get to pass the blame on them when it doesn't work.
Yeah. Well, with accountability and responsibility, that's kind of how it works,
Yeah.
right? You got to look
Yeah.
at yourself first, see when you're in that place. It's kind of like you're on the constant pause button and you're ready to take your hand off of it when you're prompted to do so. This is one of the things that came out of um, James Redfield's work with Celestine Prophecy. He makes a good point, and I think it's the third insight, maybe, where you don't speak until you feel prompted to from within.
Right.
So from that gut feeling, right? You have this welling up of, oh, I got to say something about this because it doesn't feel right. Or I've got to say something about this because it feels so right and
Right.
nobody's acknowledging it. Um, so that's a tough place to do because we're used to this 70,000 thought a day device that
Right.
wants to interact with often self distracting and self deprecating comments.
Yeah. And we believe them.
Of course, because we hear them all the time. Howard
Yeah.
Bloom wrote a great book called The Lucifer Principle. I had a brief conversation with him. I was going to do a podcast, and we got deep into the prelim and never got to record. It's still, that's a life achievement for me. Howard is one of the most brilliant minds on the planet. And in the Lucifer, he basically said, Lucifer Principle, he states that few people, and this is proven throughout history. He did a scientific exploration, is what the subtitle is. And what he found was that a few people manage populations, usually by lies and deceitful practices that are promoted through the control of the media stream, whether it be a town crier or the internet. And people are pummeled until they believe it to be true
Right.
because that's all they hear. And we don't have enough foresight to say, well, wait a minute, that didn't feel right. Right? Because we're not in our bodies. We're
Yeah.
living from here up. All we're doing is getting this feed in.
Well, also, I think there's the integrity factor of standing up and saying, hey, that's not right. Right. There's way too many people who are
That's
afraid
scary.
to be a voice that says, hey, I don't agree with this because you're going to get a lot of criticism back and you got to be pretty strong in your belief. You know, There's an expression I use that the only thing that stays in the middle of the road is roadkill. Right? So you got to make a decision. You got to pick what side you're going to be on, and you got to firmly stand on that side and have the integrity to believe what you believe and not worry about what other people think of your belief.
Now, I would take that one further, right? Because you're still in a bipolar situation. What unifies? How can you bring seemingly divergent agendas together to work as one? And for years, 20 years, I'd spent in facilitating building road and bridge construction projects, multi-million dollar 2 to 5 year projects, right? Construction is one of the most adversarial environments that you'll ever want to get in, with people wanting their own way, usually dollar driven, sometimes ego driven. The idea of partnering, though, is to get everybody on the same page, to flush out the principles of working together: communication, trust, support, community, and then bringing up the issues that everyone knows is present or are present in the project plan, and then dealing with them individually to create it as an issue resolution plan, so that when that event takes place in the schedule, they have a plan to fix it, because it can't be done until that happens. And then there's no work stoppage as a
Right.
result, because they've got the solution in place. They just pull the trigger. And work stoppage can be, for an hour, it can range from $10,000 to $1 million, depending on the size of the project.
Right. Yeah, I often find too that it's not so much that people disagree on the destination or like the end goal, but they disagree on the approach to get there. Right? Everyone's
Sure.
got their own independent way that they think is right.
Right.
And I think, to the question you asked before, I think the unifying factor there is love. Like, if you truly love the other person and you're willing to, hey, endure this together with them, right? It's not a matter of who's right or who's wrong. It's a matter of like, how do we come together and find a common solution that benefits everyone, or at least doesn't negatively affect either one of us,
Yeah.
to get to the end goal we both agree on. But
And
far
what's
too
so
often we forget that part.
I absolutely do. And why? That's a question I ask, because it seems so apparent. And yet, why are we so adverse to bringing the discussion of love into any environment we're in? It's like, oh, that is such a, you know,
If you want my answer to that question, I think
I
it's because
love it.
most people,
It's a rhetorical question, but yeah,
yeah,
it's got
but I think
individual answers.
it's most people don't truly love themselves. They don't know themselves. I think that there's a lot of people who struggle with knowing themselves authentically and truly loving themselves, right? They sit in those 3/4 of 70,000 thoughts when they don't love themselves. And because they can't truly love themselves for who they authentically are, how could they approach another situation with love?
Sure. Well, and that brings in the trust factor that, nobody's going to get hurt. Nobody's going to die. Who was it? There was a 70s rock band, Go for a Soda. Nobody gets hurt and nobody dies, right? So take time to go out for a soda and realize that, maybe a Yoda soda, right? It would help in that moment of there is no try,
Right.
right? There's only do or do not. And so by being willing to step into that, and at least have a cursory question that dips your toe into that ocean of love, then you can take your relationship and join with others to find safe harbor better.
Yeah.
Because once you open that door, I guarantee I've watched it happen, right? It's like everybody goes, oh, finally, somebody brought it in, right? but everybody's afraid to because of the connotations that have been given to people, the woo-woo, the weird, the insane, all these kinds of things that people are called who attempt to bring spirituality into the workplace.
Right. Yeah.
How do we bridge those best practices of business, commerce, community, and spirituality?
Yeah. I think you start by healing yourself first. Like if all of us start on that journey of finding out who we are authentically and healing our own traumas and realizing, hey, they were all for our benefit.
Mm-hmm.
We may not have known it at the time, but there was a purpose for it.
Sure.
I think then we can show up for each other. Right. And I think if all of us start that journey, it becomes this, ripple effect, and how much good is created from that by us showing up for ourselves first.
Precisely.
Yeah, I love it. So I want to thank you tremendously for this conversation. It was a true pleasure to sit with you and just talk. And I know I personally enjoyed this tremendously. I'm sure my audience will as well. Any final thoughts or any ways that we can support you?
Oh gosh, yeah. My main goal, I was told as a teenager that I was here to serve in such a way to help facilitate harmony among people and planet. And I've spent 50 years diving into different things, different industries. You've heard me mention some of them. It's been a wonderful professional journey. I've got 42 books now on Amazon,
Wow.
reflecting on a lot of things, and podcast, One World in a New World, that hit 1 million views in March of last year, all about bridging this inner and outer reality, acknowledging that, starting with my guests, how they found their inner connection. So there's 186 shows there that are self-reflecting, and deep dives into some materials. Unfortunately, I've had the experience and understanding and education to do so. And then there's Planetary Citizens, which is a 50-year project that I've had, not knowing how it was going to evolve. It's planetaryscitizens.net. And that's what I mentioned earlier about the breakdown of the co-creation wheel in a way that makes sense, and creating a holistic system for the future. We got to talk about it first, and that's really what it's set up for, is to discuss and explore the opportunities that we might have through who's been pioneering, panel discussions eventually, and strategies to share that information in groups and forums and things like that on a future basis.
I love
And
that.
of course, I have a coaching site, bethedream.com. What a name to have, right?
Yeah, that's a great one. So again, man, just a huge honor. I appreciate the opportunity and the time to sit together, and it's been a
Yeah,
pleasure.
it's been my pleasure. This is just you're present, you're authentic, you're real, and you go deep.
Thank you.
What's
I
not to
appreciate that.
enjoy?
It's again, just a credit back to what we talked about before, and I've been on this journey of figuring out who I am authentically and then just showing up. And it's what I enjoy most about these opportunities. It's not a rigid set of questions. I'm going to sit here and just grill you on 15 things that I happen to Google about you beforehand,
Right.
but I can show up as me, you can show up as you, and we can find that commonality together and just talk. And I find that there's so much fruit that's produced when two people show up authentically and just care about helping other people. Those are some of the most impactful shows I've ever done for that reason. And
Well,
success leaves
well,
clues, right?
yeah, and we had a great example coming in. I don't know how much of it
Yeah.
is right, but it gave an example of how, I faced problem. We faced problem, but it was my problem, right? I was trying to get the background, couldn't do it. Worked on solutions for short, found out that didn't work. So now we're down to plan C or D, right? And
Right.
eventually I went to plan E and just put a background up and said, okay, let's go.
Right. Yeah.
And that's a
And
perfect example of what we can do in life, in working with what you have. Just figure out how to do it,
right.
right?
And had we let that one, which really was pretty trivial, had we let that one roadblock stop us, we would not have had this conversation, which I know matter of factly will help a lot of people just really show up in their own lives.
Yeah.
So it's, again, a lot of credit to just showing up and not letting that little roadblock or who to blame
Elizabeth
or be
Coolidge, I
mad.
think, said, persistence above all
Yeah.
wins.
Yep. Can't be the person who doesn't stop showing up.
Yeah.
All right. Well, again, tremendous honor. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Honor's mine, Jim. Thank you.